Welcome in, everyone. Today we're diving deep into the human rights situation in Bangladesh, specifically what happened during those protests back in July and August of 2024. You all requested a clear picture, and thankfully, we have a great starting point, the UN fact-finding report. And just to be clear, this report was commissioned by Bangladesh's interim government, so we'll be using it to unpack the key findings and really figure out what options the interim government has to address all of this. Now, I know a lot of people point to that controversial court decision on job quotas as the trigger for the protests, but a report is pretty clear. The court decision was just the spark. To get to the heart of this, we need to understand the system. It's like, imagine this constant power struggle in Bangladesh's political scene. You have this one dominant party that basically controls everything. They use the courts, the police, any institution they can to shut down any opposition. It's a winner-take-all system, and the report highlights this as a major factor that led to the unrest. And then you add in another layer, the corruption. Crony capitalism is running rampant. Put yourself in the shoes of a young person in Bangladesh for a second. You see limited opportunities, and no one seems to be listening to your concerns. There's a powerful protest song that really captures this mood. It says, "The ones who are privileged keep getting more, and everything else fails in front of corruption. The ones who are honest have nothing to eat." That line, it really gets to the core of the frustration. You have this explosive mix of inequality and a system that feels rigged against you. And, well, things boiled over. The government's response to these protests, it wasn't random. It was calculated, systematic even. They went from these low-level intimidation tactics to a full-on crackdown military style. The report names names. It details how the Chhatra League, that's the student wing of the ruling party, was involved. Then you have the police, the RAB, the BGD, even the army eventually. It was a show of force, and the human cost was immense. We're talking over 800 deaths, including 10 women, and over 12,000 injured. And these are likely underestimates given the chaos. But it's not just the numbers that are horrifying. It's the way these people died. The report has evidence of extrajudicial killings. The use of force that was way out of line. They were using military-grade weapons. Rifles, shotguns with these lethal metal pellets, and often against protesters who weren't posing any immediate threat. The report highlights this one case, Abu Sayed. He was a student protester, shot and killed by police with those metal pellets. He wasn't a threat. Witness accounts and the UN's own digital forensics back that up. It's a truly heartbreaking story, but it doesn't end there. The report also documents how security forces were actively blocking medical care for injured protesters. One case that really stood out to me was Sheik Hasina. This young man, he was shot multiple times by police, and instead of helping him, they stopped others from doing so. They even fired tear gas at his injured body. It's hard to even fathom that level of cruelty, and it gets worse. The report goes on to describe how intelligence agencies were putting pressure on medical staff. They were intimidating them, forcing them to falsify reports. Some doctors who were treating protesters were even arrested. It was a deliberate denial of basic medical care. Just another layer of horror on top of an already dire situation. And this crackdown, it wasn't confined to the streets or hospitals. The report highlights this wave of mass arrests and torture that was happening behind closed doors. The police arrested over 10,000 men, 25 women, and even 63 children. They were using these mass cases, basically throwing out vague accusations against huge groups of people to justify these arrests. It was arbitrary detention, plain and simple. And the conditions of these detention centers, they were brutal. Torture was used routinely to force confessions. There was no due process, no semblance of justice. On top of all of this, the government also went after information. They tried to control the narrative completely. Internet shutdowns, intimidation of media outlets, manipulating information, they did it all. The National Telecommunications Monitoring Center, the NTMC, they played a major role in all of this. They were the ones enabling the surveillance and targeting of protesters. The protests themselves, they eventually died down, but the aftermath was anything but peaceful. You saw this wave of revenge violence erupt, targeting the police, Awami League officials, even members of minority groups. It was a tragic outcome of all the violence and division that had been unleashed. Now, the interim government, they have started investigating these violations. But let's be real, they're facing an uphill battle. You have this deep-rooted culture of impunity. The justice system itself is heavily politicized. And then you have witnesses who are terrified to come forward. It makes achieving real accountability incredibly difficult. So the question is, how does the interim government break this cycle? How do they move past the violence and impunity? Well, the report does offer a potential path forward, but it won't be easy. First and foremost, the report really stresses the need for a truly independent investigation into all these human rights violations. They even suggest bringing in international support and expertise, to make sure it's impartial, which is a tall order, honestly. especially given how messed up the justice system in Bangladesh already is. But the report doesn't stop at just calling for investigations and punishments. It goes deeper, saying we need to dismantle the systems that have allowed these perpetrators to get away with this stuff for so long. It's about breaking that cycle of impunity, making it clear that no matter who you are, if you commit human rights violations, you'll be held accountable. But accountability is just one part of it. The report also recommends setting up what they call a transitional justice mechanism. This would involve truth-seeking, reparations for the victims, and really important institutional reforms to prevent this from happening again. It's not just about punishing those responsible. It's about acknowledging the harm that was done and actually trying to repair it. And it's about making sure the system itself changes so that these abuses don't keep happening. Now let's talk about the security sector, because the report has a lot to say about that too. They call for a complete overhaul, focusing on making it less political, more professional, and really instilling a clear commitment to human rights. One of the most, surprising recommendations is to completely disband the RAB, the Rapid Action Battalion. They're known for being incredibly brutal and completely unaccountable. It's a bold move, for sure. But the report argues that it's necessary if the interim government is serious about ending these abuses of power. Imagine a security force that's actually accountable to the people, operates within the law, and respects human rights. That's the vision the report lays out. But it's not just about reforming the security forces. The report also talks about changing the laws themselves. Specifically, they recommend repealing or at least reforming laws like the Digital Security Act. That law has been used over and over to silence dissent. It's about creating a space where people can actually express their views without fear of being punished. It's a fundamental part of any democracy. And the report urges the interim government to actually protect those who speak out. Journalists, human rights defenders, anyone exercising the right to free expression and assembly. It's about fostering a culture where dissent is valued, not silenced, where critical voices can actually contribute to building a better future. But let's not forget about the root causes of all of this, the things that fuel the discontent in the first place. We're talking about economic inequality, corruption, the lack of opportunities, especially for young people. The report is very clear. These issues have to be addressed. They suggest some pretty concrete measures like promoting transparency, cracking down on corruption, investing in education and job creation. It's a long-term vision, but it's one where all citizens have a real chance to thrive. Imagine a Bangladesh where young people actually have opportunities, where corruption is tackled head-on, where the wealth is shared more fairly. That's the path to real stability and progress. But here's the thing. This report's implications, they go way beyond Bangladesh. What's happening there is part of a much bigger trend. There's erosion of democratic norms and human rights. We're seeing it all over the world. Think about it. In recent years, how many governments have we seen cracking down on dissent, limiting freedoms, undermining their own democratic institutions? And what's even more concerning is how technology is being used. It used to be hailed as this tool for freedom, for democracy, but now authoritarian regimes are using it for surveillance, censorship, control. Bangladesh is a prime example. They've been incredibly sophisticated with their use of internet shutdowns and targeted surveillance. It's a wake-up call for all of us. We need to pay attention to these trends. We need to hold our own governments accountable. We can't let these values, these rights slip away, both at home and abroad. Because at the end of the day, this UN report, it's a call to action, not just for the interim government of Bangladesh, but for everyone. It's a reminder that the fight for human rights and democracy, it's a global fight, and we all have a part to play. And the report doesn't shy away from the challenges, but it does offer this roadmap for positive change. It's based on the principles of justice, accountability, human rights, democratic values, and it requires everyone to step up: the government, civil society, the international community, and most importantly, the people of Bangladesh themselves. It's about giving people a voice, empowering them, and creating a system that actually reflects their desire for a just and democratic society. It's a long and difficult journey, no doubt, but it's a journey worth taking. Now, the report doesn't sugarcoat things. It paints a pretty grim picture of what's happening in Bangladesh. But it also ends on this note of hope. It urges the interim government to take this opportunity, this chance, to break the cycle of violence and impunity, to build a future where human rights are truly respected and protected. It's a powerful message, and one that we, as global citizens, should be echoing and supporting. If you want to learn more, I encourage you to check out the full UN fact-finding report. We'll have a link to it in the episode description. It's a really valuable resource if you want to understand just how complex this crisis is and what needs to happen to move forward. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Given all the complexities, all the deep-rooted challenges, what do you think are the most important steps for Bangladesh to take? How do they get to a future where human rights are truly respected and protected? It's a question worth pondering, because the future of Bangladesh, like any nation, depends on its commitment to upholding the rights and freedoms of all its citizens. But it goes beyond just laws and institutions, right? It's about changing how people think, creating a culture where human rights are truly respected, and people feel empowered to hold their leaders accountable. And I think the UN report kind of gets at that. It's not just about these technical solutions. It's calling for a much bigger shift in Bangladesh, a shift towards a society that's more inclusive, more just, more democratic. It's about a Bangladesh where power is shared, where people aren't afraid to speak their minds, where human rights are seen as essential, not something that gets in the way of progress. It's a powerful vision, and it's one that resonates, I think, far beyond Bangladesh. It speaks to this, I don't know, this universal desire for dignity, freedom, and justice. So as we wrap up, I think it's worth asking ourselves, what role can we play in supporting this vision? It's easy to feel helpless, right? Like our individual actions don't really matter. But history tells us that when people come together, even in small ways, it can make a huge difference. So what can we do? We can stay informed, talk about these issues with our friends, families, colleagues, raise awareness. We could support organizations that are working on the ground in Bangladesh to promote human rights and democracy.
And we can hold our own governments accountable, push them to use their influence to support positive change. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're part of a global community, and we have a responsibility to stand up for what's right, no matter where it's happening. So let's keep learning, let's keep engaging, let's keep pushing for a world where human rights are truly respected and protected for everyone, everywhere. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.